Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Shavis, Pedig Tes, Halacha Hey. We're going to be learning Daf Ayin Vav, starting all the way on top by the new Mishnah. We're going to learn more about the biur times for various types of produce. And what we will see is that when it comes to grass, whether grass that's consumed by man, whether it's generally grass that's consumed by animals, we differentiate halachically between fresh grass and dried grass. Meaning, when it comes to the biur, if I harvested grass when it's fresh, whether the grass in my storage retains its freshness or not, it's called fresh grass. And I can only have it until when fresh grass out there in the wild is available for the animals. Even if there's dried of such grass out there, the grass that I harvested may not be consumed. That's going to be a very interesting concept, as we will see that expressed vis-a-vis a few items in the Mishnah. We will also learn in our Mishnah a halacha regarding the second rainfall period. This is a topic that we have in Bavli Tainis Davov. Actually, over there, just to remind ourselves, there's a three-way machloikas tanoim. When is the Revia Shenia, the second rainfall period? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Meir holds Zayin Mar Cheshvan. Rabbi Yehuda holds Yud Zayin Mar Cheshvan, right, the day that the Mabul began at. Rabbi Yossi holds Chav Gimel Mar Cheshvan. By the way, Mar does not mean bitter. Mar means drop, a drop of water, because it is the month of rain in the Holy Land. Regardless, the dates, we're going to have in our Mishnah a din of Shvius that's connected to the Revia Shenia, which will therefore bring us into, in the Gemara, in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, many other dinim that are related to the Revia Shenia, including if someone makes a neder, not to benefit from someone else until the time of the second rainfall. And we'll see in the Gemara that whether this means the actual second rainfall or whether this refers to the date every Tana l'shitasai of when the rainfall generally should fall. We will also have various braises, b'shitas Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, regarding rainfall. And finally, if we'll get there, we're going to have a discussion in our Gemara whether the isur of svichim midrabanan applies to animal food or whether the isur of svichim only applies to Michael Adam. We'll leave it at that, and we will dive right inside. So says the Holy Mishnah. Hamalaket asavim lachim. I want you to read the top Rashirilio. I know when I read the Mishnah, I began understanding that the fresh grass, right, is fed for animals. What I'm saying now is Negeya. Says the Rashirilio that the first topic of our Mishnah is types of grass that are la'achilas adam. We live here in Los Angeles. Let me tell you, it's not uncommon that people here eat grass. When you go to a restaurant, you can pay for a plate of grass, mamish, the way you pay for a plate of meat. So obviously people want to eat it. Okay, so now we are learning the dinam of biur. Till when are you allowed to keep the grass in your home without doing the removal? Well, it has to do with how long is fresh grass available in the field, and emphasizing that even if the grass that you harvested, first of all, it could be the Mishnah doesn't make a difference. Maybe some people knew how to store it in a way where it retains its freshness, but that's not what's negeya. Whether what you have in your home retained freshness or whether it dried out since you harvested while it was fresh, so it has a category of fresh grass, and you can only retain it prior to biur if there is fresh grass available in the fields. How will you know whether the grass out there, lechayas, are fresh? So says the Mishnah, Ache yivash hamasoik, which is amazing, until when the ground dries up. Now, I want you to know that the ground drying up is not an absolute deadline. It's a rule of thumb, which means as long as the ground remains moist, you may assume that the grasses out there are still fresh. When the ground dries up, then the assumption is, this is already way into the summer, that even the grass that's connected is already dried out, And you must then perform biur with the grass that you harvested when the grass was moist. Yechap, that's the Mishnah. V'hamegabev biyavesh. If you gather dry grasses, here is where the Rashidilio says, why would anyone gather dry grasses? 6th line from the top from the right. If you gathered dried grass, this is already animal fodder. And make no mistake, animal fodder is included in the laws of Shvi'is. Now you would think if it's dry grass, so what's the end? When is it no longer available? You have to appreciate that grass should be more available than any other item. Mela vegetable. A vegetable, gets consumed at a certain point. Grass in the wild, it should be like it's infinite. It's not. Because at some point, as the Mishnah says, once the second rainfall comes, at that point, the grass that's on the fields would completely decompose or they would rot. Now, we will see in the Gemara that there's different levels of it rotting. And this is very important. It'll be a big chiddush today we'll have in the Gemara. Rotting in this part of the Mishnah means that animals will no longer eat it. It's not available. It's not there. Even the dry grass is no longer dry grass. And therefore, the grass that you have in the home is subject to biur, like we spoke a bit more yesterday, l'Ramban, l'Rambam, 2 times of biur. However you're going to understand biur. Now is the biur deadline. Okay. And why does it, just explaining, why would the grass decompose and rot? Because that's what water does. Water, sometimes water will bring back the moisture. And sometimes when something is already so dried out, water will completely destroy it. And again, just to remind ourselves, like we mentioned in the intro, Rabbi Meir, the Reviya Sheniya Zayin Mar Cheshvan, Rabbi Yehuda, that's the Yud Zayin Mar Cheshvan, and Rabbi Yossi, it is Chav Gimel Mar Cheshvan. And here in the Mishnah, it doesn't mean the time of the rainfall, it means when the rain actually falls, because it is the second rain that completely ruins the grass, as Kevin just showed us in a picture of what rotten grass on the field looks like. Now, basically, it turns into mud. Similarly, says the Mishnah, Ale konim and va'ale gefanim, the leaves of reeds and the leaves of grapevines. I'm going again, l'chu'ura, that they are picked. And they are l'maichel adam, whether they are eaten, whether they are pickled inside other foods, l'maichel adam. Same idea. We differentiate halachically between fresh leaves of grapevines versus dry leaves of grapevines. So until when can you have from what you picked? Until the time where the ones that remained out there on your plants, until when they fall on their own from their branches. Why will they fall? They fall because they are dried. Now, when they fall, Danny, they're still available. Yeah, but these leaves, like most leaves that we know, once they fall, they right away dry out. So again, we're differentiating between fresh and dry. And again, when I pick leaves, let's say I need them to pickle them. When I pick them, they also dried out. Doesn't matter. Since I picked them from the branch, they are in the category of fresh grapevine leaves. Once the ones in the wild fall, even though they're on the ground available, they are now dry. Once they turn dry, moist is not available. If moist is not available, that which I picked as moist has to be biured, like we had on the Reish of the Mishnah. And this is like the big thing that we're learning today. Now again, if you gather dry leaves, like we mentioned, after they fall, they're still there. So until when can you have them? Now, Danny, this is based on the presumption that dry leaves will always be there. In other words, it's not like a vegetable that animals, they look for, they search for, they eat it, and there's no more left at a certain point. No, there is an abundance of them. Here again, once the rain falls, not which rain, the second rain, they become completely rotten, they completely decompose. So even they're not available. So now what? Now you have to do biur with the ones that you picked. And when do the ones out there, the dry ones out there, become rotten? when the second rainfall falls, so ad shetered reviya shniyam. That is the Tanakama, all based on this concept that dry and moist are two different categories. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with the whole premise. When you pick moist grass, my friend, I don't know how long it takes, it will dry out quickly. It's going to dry out way before the ground dries up. When you pick leaves, it will dry in your storage room way before the second rain falls. I don't care. When you pick something, that item, dry or moist, you have it, you can keep it, you don't need to do beer only until when that which is in the field is no longer available. So in all of them, bekulam, the Mishnah gave three cases, the grass, the leaves of reeds, and the leaves of grapevines, acheteted, revia sheniyah, moist and dry are not separate species. Very simple. Okay.
I'm sorry. Is this someplace where it only rains twice, or am I misunderstanding?
So let's go back, Kevan, to Masechtas Tainus. In the Holy Land, it doesn't rain at all during the summer. Of course, there can always be an exception, but that's the rule. And then there is the rain season. The rain season basically begins Sukkot time. That's the truth. Nevertheless, we only start davening in Israel for rain, Zayin Mar Cheshvan. But really, the rain season starts earlier. And the way it generally rains in the Holy Land is that there is the first rain. Hashem makes it that way. And actually, on the seventh day of the first rain is called the second rainfall period. And then there is the third rain. That's the way it worked.
Got it.
What are those dates? We already mentioned. Machloikes, Ramei, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yos. Now, once we mentioned dinim connected to rainfall, kayoytze boy, another din, which is connected then to the second rainfall period. And that is case number one. If a person rents a house from his friend and he doesn't specify the time, 30-day rental, he says, I'm renting it to you for whatever amount of money until, and he tells him, those were the words mentioned, agreed upon, until when the second rainfall comes. And now we want to know, the owner wants to evict the tenant. Now, I take back. He didn't say he told him ad hakshamim, slicha, until the rains. Now, guys, the key here is that he used lashon rabim. He didn't say ad hageshem. Had he said ad hageshem, it would have meant until the time of the first rain. Kshamim, plural. That's the reason. So the din is that until, let's go with Rabbi Yehuda, right, the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, you can't evict the tenant because you made up. Kshamim means the second rainfall. Another din, if a person makes a vow that you are prohibited on me, you and your things are prohibited on me, it means I cannot benefit from you, and I didn't specify anything more than saying the words ad hagishamim, until the rains, again, lashon rabim. So here we say, acheteda drevia shnia. By Nedarim, it's a bigger chiddush because generally the rule by Nedarim is halech achar lashon b'nei adam. So the Mishnah is telling you that's lashon b'nei adam. When they say rains, they mean the second. Another din, ad emosai nichnasim aniyam lepardeisos. Now the aniyam that we are referring to is poors. Let's go back to the prior Mesechtes when we learned about leket and shikha and peyah, that aniyim have the right to go into our fields and to gather it in non-shvius years. There's a rule that once the crops begin to sprout, people walking on those crops will ruin them. So until when may aniyim enter into the fields to collect the leket shikha and peyah, here again, acheteda drevia shenia. After the first rain, nothing begins to sprout on any level. But from when the second rain falls, since it is from then that crops begin to sprout, they can be damaged, or they will be damaged when people walk on top of it. Mela, they no longer can walk into the fields. Now here, it's amazing how, same Mishnah, the way the Mishnah is interpreted in the Yerushalmi makes it clear that the Yerushalmis, the Yidden and Eretz Yisrael, had one girsa in this Mishnah. And in the Bavli, there is an opposite girsa in this Mishnah. The girsa in the Mishnah and the Bavli I'll read right now, and then I'll reread it the way the Yerushalmi learns it. So now, according to the Bavli, me'emosai, or ad emosai, until when can you have benefit by burning teven ukash al shvius, when you have completely dried out straw, which was used for fuel? Means you are deriving benefit from it. Until when may you benefit? Again, in the Bavli, guys, the girsa is the way it's here in the parentheses. Since we just learned in the Mishnah Dani that by the Reviyah Shaniyah, the item becomes completely rotten, you got to do biur. Once the time of biur comes, you can't have hana'ah if you didn't do biur. Even though you're not eating it, so what? These real dried out whole straws or chopped straws, teven ukash, are used for fuel. That's the normal usage. So until when can you use it? Until the second rainfall, because it's not yet the time of it. It fits with the flow of the Mishnah. The Yerushalmi understands it completely differently. And when we're speaking about specifically teven ukash, a big chiddush then, when something in the field, the straw that fell, that's laying out there, becomes completely rotten and destroyed, you cannot say that it no longer is asur bahana. It's mutar bahana. And let me take a step back. What is teven ukash made for primarily? It was used primarily for animal consumption, for animal fodder. Since there's a rule called la'achla v'loy lahefseit, so you may not use it for fuel because there is a kedusha. It's made for eating, drinking, right? For anointing. It's not made for fuel. We had this before. So the Mishnah is saying a big chiddush that this type of teven ukash becomes so destroyed after the second rainfall. At that point, if a person would somehow manage to use it for fuel, it would not be usur. Why would it not be usur? Because it's so decomposed that it's not teven ukash. There is no more kedusha shvius. If you can figure out how to use it for fuel, gesun tehait. Chiddush of the Mishnah is that once the teven ukash on the fields that becomes so rotten that it loses the kedusha of shvius, and therefore now you are allowed to use it for fuel. You know what we say? That the teven ukash that you have in your home will also be allowed for you to use for fuel. Because since the Torah links that which you have in the house with that which you have in the field, up until now we were using that linkage to apply the time of biur. Now we are applying a big novelty, that if something in the field becomes so modified because of the rain, it's no longer what it used to be at all, and it loses the kedusha of shvius. That removes the kedusha of shvius of the teven ukash you have in the house. And according to this, the words will be mei emosai, not ad emosai. From when can you have hana from teven ukash? And you would say never. It's animal fodder. This kedusha shvius, you can't use it for anything other than its designated purpose. La'achla v'loy lahefseit. Says the Mishnah, misheteired Reviyah Shaniyah, like we mentioned, that in the field is no longer b'chlal be'en, doesn't it exist? If you can use it, it's not shvius. It's like it's nothing. You so bottled it that you can use it. That which you have in the house can also be used. Now that's huge, and we'll see clearly that's the way the Gemara understood it. The Bavli had a whole different gear, so what we're saying now is b'chlal not the way it's understood over there. Says the Gemara. First of all, our Mishnah began with 3 products. The first one was grass. Actually, I take it back. The Mishnah began with 4 products. Asavim, Hamagabev biyavesh, Alikonim, Aligfanim. 4 products. So Rabbi B'Shem Rabbi Yechanan removed from our Mishnah the Alikonim. He only kept in the Mishnah the Aligfanim. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because of a Metzias. Rabbi Yechanan felt that Alikonim ein lahem biur, since they're not subject to the laws of biur at all, so it's not shaykh to say it over here. You know, when the Mishnah says that Gefanim, once they fall off, what did the Mishnah say? Once they fall off their branches on their own, according to the Tanakama, Mela, they dry out, and the Tanakama differentiates halachically between dry and moist. So the ones that you picked when they were moist, they have to do biur. He says, Ali Kanem are not subject to biur at all. Period. And why is that? So the Gemara explains. First of all, the Tanakain, the way Rabbi Yochanan said it must be, you have to remove from the Mishnah Ali Kanim. We found a brayso that Taka says so explicitly that Ali Kanim and that Kanim reads Ali Oig is sumak, Ali Charuvim is Karab Buxer, Ein Lahem Biur. And the brayso says why? Mipnei she'ein minam kolem, because they never disappear from the field, which is quite amazing. In other words, even after the rains, b'chlal, or even after they dry out, doesn't matter. They were edibles. I want to tell you, they were basically used. They were added in your pickles to add some tam. In other words, they were ultimately consumed by people. Just number one. Number two, for the purpose for which they were used for, it makes absolutely no difference whether they're moist or dry. Many things when you eat, you can only eat them when they're moist. Or many things when you eat, you can only eat them when you're dry. They were never eaten raw. They were eaten after they were pickled. It doesn't matter how, and not only that, it's not only that which you picked can always be used. That which fell off the trees and fell on the ground and dried out remains edible forever. And more than that, even after the rain falls. It's amazing. The texture of these leaves don't rot. So they become dry, they become wet, they become dry, they become wet. They're good. Like cloves. They last forever. Okay. Says the Gemara, Rabzeya, boy. Now that we mentioned the din of a renting of a house, and the best thing that the clarity that was unclear was, I'm renting the house, I'm renting you the house, I'll be renting the house until the rains. So Rabzeya said, boya here and boya later here, every now and then, doesn't mean a question, it means a statement. He says like this, that the reason why the Mishnah paskins that it's Reviya Sheniya is only because he used a plural expression, and therefore, if Amar at Hageshem, if the renter, the balabas, or the rentee, what they made up was, I'm renting it until Geshem B'Loshen Yachid. Indeed, at Sheyered Geshem Echad. Nekuda. Says the Gemara, the Ayin Vav Amid Beis. Tamon Taninan. We are quoting a Mishnah Masechta Shkolim. Ha'omer. Harei olai eitzim. Eitzim are brought on the Mizbeach. A person used a plural expression. Says the Mishnah, if a person made a vow, right? We are learning today's Rambam. We are finishing Erchen and Charamim. These are the dinim. Harei olai eitzim lo yitchais mishnei gezidim. Again, plural. He has to bring a minimum, and therefore he has to bring 2 blocks of wood. Rabbi Yosi b'Rabbun Omar Rabbi Bar Mamol Boyi. He said in the name of Rabbi Bar Mamol, who Boyi again means said, Chavre, based on the Mishnah and Shkolim, based on the understanding that the only reason why he has to bring 2 blocks of wood is only because he used a Lashon Rabim. Indeed, if he said Harei Olai Eitz, he only has to bring a Gezer Echad, he only has to bring one block of wood. And now, I want to let you know that sometimes in the Beis HaMikdash, when things needed to be brought in pairs, you did not even have an option of bringing one of the two. I'll give you an example. Almost all of the bird karbanos, not all, almost all came in pairs. One for an oil, one for a chatos. Can't bring one. And the Torah actually says that we bring shnei gizrei eitzim. Now, if we were to view both blocks of wood as part of one carbon, then I don't care what expression you would use, you would never be allowed to bring one. Happens to be that even though 2 blocks of wood have to be brought up, they are viewed as 2 separate donations. And therefore, they don't have to be brought by the same person. And therefore, indeed, like the Amoida learns by implication that the only reason why, if a person says Harei Olai Eitzim in the Mishnah, you cannot bring less than 2 is only because he used Lashon Rabim. But he has an option of using Lashon Yachid. And when it comes to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, each one is viewed as a carbon b'fnei atzmai, as we'll read it inside. Amar Abu Lazar, I want you to know that Masnisa Amar Kain, a Mishnah says so. That what? That when you bring the 2 gizrim, shezeh carbon b'fnei atzmai, v'zeh carbon b'fnei atzmai. Where do we have this in the Mishnah? He's quoting a Mishnah Masechtas Yuma, or like the Gabe likes to remind me Masechtas Yoima, that the Taninon, that Shnayim biyodim shnei gizrei eitzim, when we're speaking about how all of the different parts of the karbanos, whether it is Shal Shachar, whether it is Shal Ben Harbayim, are brought up on the Beis HaMikdash, and they made the lottery ultimately after they had this issue with the racing. And every they wanted to spread the mitzvah amongst the maximum amount of kohanim, and there we learn clearly that when it comes to the shnei gizrei eitzim that have to be brought up every morning, they were not brought up by one kohen. They were brought up by two kohanim. Now, if we would have viewed it as one carbon comprised of two parts, they would have been brought up by one carbon. Amazing.
One kohen.
One kohen. Thank you. I'm still under the effect of last night. L'chaim. Tani, we learned in a brayso.
Right?
Yes, Danny. Because Danny's thinking there's one animal, and how many kohanim? I think 13. No, 13 kohanim, and you have the head and the leg and. Thank you. Okay, I thought the same thing. Very good.
But when you're bringing an animal as a korban, don't you have to bring enough wood for it to burn completely?
Actually, the way the system used to work is that they made 3 pyres on the altar, bechlal before the korbanos, before they brought their korbanos, and compounded with be'emes, the way it should be kaven, the way it will be in Bayis Shlishi, that the fire that falls from the heaven will see and will know exactly what it is. But a miraculous heavenly fire was so much more potent than the human fire that really we would not need the human fire. It's a mitzvah to bring it. It's like when it comes to making a parnasa, what's really happening is God is doing what God does. And Elama, a person will say, so why do I have to do anything? Because that the mitzvah is to act responsibly. I think that's a very good point, Kevin. So in other words, when things were going properly and there were miracles in the Beis Hamikdash, the whole point of they only brought 2 logs of wood. That was the whole Mishnah that Shlomo HaMelech with the little Mizbeach on the day of the inauguration, I forgot how many, he brought over 100,000 animals. And how is it possible? Because of the Aryeh, the heavenly, the lion that Mamish ate everything up. Okay, let's go back there. Tell me, learned in the Brayso.
13 the wood.
The 13, that correct. But the point is well taken. I would maybe just counter argue that when it comes to the animal parts, maybe it's begashmi is it's like it's too heavy. Maybe there was a practical part to it. These 2 blocks of wood, they were very little. That Rambam describes us. It was a little plank of 1 amma by 1 amma. I think, not. I think it's 18 inches by 18 inches, and it was a thumb breadth. It was very thin. In other words, why would you divide that amongst 2? And I'll go more than that. Even by the animal parts, Danny, Kohanim held 2 parts. No, because I remember, Kohanim did not hold. In other words, the right hand, the left hand, yes. The head and the shoik and the this and the that. In other words, they walked on the Mizbeach holding with, maybe I might be wrong. Everything is biyad yamin. I take it back. Everything has to be biyad yamin. But okay, for sure, Kohanim, part of the animals were divided that a Kohen held more than 1 cut. That I remember.
The 2 legs.
The 2 legs, that's enough for me. In other words, it's not like everyone held 1 item. So why would they not have 1 holding 2? And we always say shnei gizrei eitzim. The Torah puts it together. Okay, let's go right. Tani, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yossi Yomer. Here's very, very important. Kol davar shehu toli b'reviyah. When we have in the Mishnah a couple of dinim, we had a few dinim, right? We had the din of renting a house. We had a din of making a neder. And here's the question, my friends. Option 1, option 2. Option 1 is that the Reviyah Shaniya, Danny, doesn't mean when it actually falls. It means, like we mentioned, let's go with the Shitas, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, right? That the Reviyah Shaniya is Yud Zayin Mar Cheshvan. It means until the 17th of Mar Cheshvan. Or it means until when the rain actually falls. Now, by the way, even though the Rabbi Yehuda, the second rainfall period is the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, don't think it always fell on the 17th. Sometimes it would fall on the 16th. Sometimes it would fall on the 20th. Right? Sometimes it didn't fall and they fasted. So the question is, does it mean the date or does it mean the actual rainfall? Which one? So says Rabbi Yossi in the Brayso, it depends on the context. There isn't a hard and fast rule. He says that kol davar shu toli b'reviyah, if the din that we are talking about is actually depending on the rain itself, then what is meant by the second rainfall? The actual rainfall. I'll give you guys a great example. The example would be, Danny, someone makes a neder, I will not use shoes until the second rainfall. Now, this is a guy that doesn't want to use shoes. Why? Because barefoot is much healthier. And that's why there's a whole industry today, barefoot shoes. However, one second. So why are you wearing shoes? Because there comes a point that the earth is so muddy that you got to wear shoes. So when you say until the second rainfall, the logic is you didn't mean the date of Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yossi. You meant the actual rain. Because the neder is about getting dirty, not getting dirty. Okay? Or the other option will be, if a person says, I won't benefit from my friend until the second rainfall, what does the actual rain have to do with anything? There, the logic is, he meant until a certain date, until a certain zman. That's the second one. The she'enu to a little bit of via, then achi yagi zman shal revia gevaldik. Let's hop another few lines. Funny, we learned in a brayso. We're going to have two braysos that is quoting Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who said a din b'negeya the rainfalls. Like we mentioned before, the first rainfall period is 7 days prior to the second rainfall period. But when I say 7 days, ad va'ad b'chlal. Ad va'ad b'chlal. So it rains, and on the 7th day of the first rain, rain falls again. So what were to happen if rain actually falls for 7 days straight? So do we view them as one rainfall? Or do we say no? Just because it rains straight, let's go with it. Now that it's raining on the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, now you already have the second rainfall. Let's go back to the vow about not using shoes until the Revia Shaniya. So now by the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, you gotta, your neder is nullified, and that's indeed the rule. We don't consider it one rainfall because it was going consecutively. We don't say so. We do say that now that it's raining, it rained first. On the 7th day, the 17th of Mar Cheshvan, it's still raining. We consider the rain of the 17th of Mar Cheshvan to be the second rainfall, and therefore the neder, for example, ends. Because you got the second rainfall. Another din that we learned b'shem Rashbag, Tani Rabbi b'shem ben Gamliel, b'chlal. Why is rain sometimes referred to in Chazal as revia? Revia also connotes copulation, because exactly that. Because shehiroi vas es haaretz, because the rain penetrates the earth. In other words, push it. The rain goes into the earth. It's not only that the rain penetrates the earth, but it causes the earth to flower and to bear fruit. Now, we're going to see clearly in the Yerushalmi, like we explained, that the Girsa and the understanding and the ending of the Mishnah is dafka not like the Bavli. And the Girsa is not Amosai. The Girsa is Mei Amosai, Nehen V'Sorfen. And the question will be, why is that? Our Mishnah is saying, according to this version, that you are allowed to benefit from Kashrut Teven after the Revia Shaniya. Why? Amar Rab Chananya, because Mikiven Shetisrach Masha Basadeh. It rots so much in the field, that which is in the field loses its status of produce. It loses its kedusha. Chiddush is that since we link Masha Babayis with Memasha Basada, if that which is in the field loses its category of Shvi'is produce, its type in the house does the same. Gavaldik. Huta Masha Babayis. That's a big Chiddush. Tani Rabbi Shayam. That what? Yes, it is. So that's why in the Bavli, the Girsa was completely different. That once the Revia Shniya falls, and now is the time you can only burn it. You can only burn it according to the Bavli until the time of Bir. According to the Yerushalmi, the concept is you may never burn it because it began as animal fodder. Chiddush is that after the Revia Shaniya, it loses the Kedusha. Not only that which is rotted in the field, even that which you have in the house. It's been akotz el akotz. Okay, one more din. Tani Rabbi Shaya. Afilu la'achar shalosh shanim asur ache yisrach. In other words, there's a brayse that seems to imply not like our Mishnah. The Mishnah says Revia Shaniya completely rots. The brayse says that Kashrut Teven, you're kidding, even after 2 or 3 years, Danny, you can't use it for burning because it's a product of Shvius and you can't destroy it. And just to make it clear, it's not that the Mishnah and the Brayse are arguing. We're not going to go with that. We're going to go with the Braisa is speaking about Tevan Ukash that is laying on rocky ground. And when it rains, it doesn't make it rot. The picture that Kevin had before was great. The Mishnah is speaking about Tevan Ukash that's laying on earth. When something is on the earth is muddy. So the Tevan Ukash gets mixed with it, and that's where it completely rots. I know it's a couple of lines behind. We started late. I'm sorry. And we'll be to be continued. We'll continue.